I entered the lobby of Vanguard Technologies at exactly 6:42 a.m., latte in my left hand, security badge clipped neatly to my blazer pocket. The building was mostly quiet, lights coming on in sections, with the low hum of servers breaking the silence. That environment suited me. No small talk, no forced interactions, just focus on the work that had defined the last 8 years of my career. The elevator ride to the 31st floor felt unusually long that morning, likely because of what I was carrying with me. I had 3 active patents in my name, 4 more in progress, and the entire Apollo framework, the neural adaptive security system that Vanguard's reputation was built on, ran on an architecture I had designed from the ground up. As the day began, I briefly wondered how others were starting their mornings and where they were tuning in from, before returning my attention to the task ahead. When the doors opened, I walked directly to my corner workspace. Floor-to-ceiling windows overlooked downtown Seattle, with the Space Needle cutting through the early mist and ferries moving across Elliott Bay. That view was earned. Every sleepless night, every abandoned prototype, and every presentation where I had to explain my own work to people with limited technical understanding led to that seat. I set my bag down and pulled up the overnight server logs. Everything was stable. Apollo was running at 99.7% efficiency across all client networks. No breaches, no irregularities, no alerts. Then the elevator chimed behind me. I looked over and saw him for the first time. Marcus Ellington. He wore a tailored navy suit, expensive shoes echoing on the concrete floor, and carried himself with the confidence of someone accustomed to control. He moved through the open workspace as if assessing newly acquired property, which was close to reality. His father, Harrison Ellington, owned 62% of Vanguard. That alone placed Marcus beyond normal accountability. He paused at several desks, tapping monitors and reviewing project boards. When his attention reached me, confusion crossed his face, followed by amusement. He remarked that he did not expect anyone to be working so early. I replied, without looking up, that I was there every morning and that Apollo required active oversight. He studied me more closely and referenced my badge, noting my role as lead architect on Apollo and the 3 patents listed. I corrected him, stating there were 4 additional patents pending. His reaction was casual, dismissive. He commented that I was not what he expected and implied he had assumed my role was largely presentational. I finally looked up and asked him to clarify. He suggested he thought I was merely the face shown during investor demonstrations. I stood, set my coffee down carefully, and addressed him directly. I explained that I designed every layer of the system, keeping the company operational, and that continued success depended on professional respect for my role. His expression tightened, and the tone shifted. I welcomed him to Vanguard and advised him not to interfere with critical systems. I returned to my work as he stood silently for several seconds before heading toward the executive offices. I did not watch him leave. I already understood the kind of issue he represented. That encounter happened on Monday. By Thursday, it was clear the situation was more serious than I had anticipated. I was working from home late that night, connected through the company VPN while testing a new encryption layer. It was nearly 1 a.m., with a documentary playing in the background that I barely noticed. While monitoring system activity, I saw an unexpected alert. A secondary access point had connected to one of my archived directories, legacy framework files that had not been touched since the last system migration. The access repeated several times. I checked the logs and saw the user was Nathan Cross, a junior engineer who had been on the team for 6 months and had no clearance for that directory. He was not just viewing files. He was extracting and copying core logic blocks, foundational algorithms I had spent 2 years developing. I then noticed his session was being observed through a shared executive connection. Tracing the session ID led directly to an executive access terminal registered to Marcus Ellington. It was clear he was directing the activity in real time, likely with the intent to reassign ownership or remove my involvement altogether. I remained calm. Instead of reacting emotionally, I documented everything. I recorded the full session, including screen activity, timestamps, IP verification, and access logs. I retrieved authentication records from my personal cloud including time-stamped files from when I was prototyping Apollo independently, before Vanguard was involved. By morning, I had a comprehensive digital trail capable of standing up in federal court. I did not sleep. I encrypted the evidence, backed it up on 3 separate drives, and sent copies to my attorney, Diane Roth, who had handled my initial patent filings and was well aware of how corporate IP disputes unfold. By 7:30 a.m., I was back in the office. At 9:15, my director scheduled an executive review meeting for 11 a.m., requesting Apollo documentation. I expected it. I arrived at 10:50. Marcus was seated at the head of the table, and his father stood by the window, arms crossed, composed and imposing. Marcus slid a manila folder toward me and stated that the company had reviewed my contributions and decided to consolidate intellectual property ownership. The document offered a one-time payment of $15,000 in exchange for full control of my patents and framework, with no royalties or continued attribution. I found the offer unreasonable and said so openly. Marcus claimed it was fair, stating the work was done on company time. I turned to Harrison and asked if that was what he had been told. Harrison responded that legal had reviewed the matter and that this was standard practice. I disagreed and explained that I had built the core architecture 18 months before my employment, with independently filed and verified patents, all properly documented. I then addressed the unauthorized access. I stated clearly that a junior engineer had accessed my protected files under Marcus's supervision, and that I had complete logs and recordings proving it. I identified the action as theft, not consolidation. The room went silent. Harrison attempted to de-escalate, but I made it clear that the situation became hostile when my work was taken without consent. I informed them that legal counsel was already involved and that Apollo's operation depended entirely on my framework. Without my authorization, deployment would result in immediate legal action. I stood, returned the folder, advised them to approach future discussions professionally, and left the room. I did not leave the building. I returned to my office, secured the door, and began making changes. I revoked every legacy access key tied to Apollo, closed all back doors, removed shared tokens, and eliminated administrative overrides outside my control. Access now required my biometric clearance and personal encryption key. I implemented dual-factor authentication across all critical nodes, enabled real-time identity verification, rotating credentials, and full session tracking. I rebuilt the access infrastructure from the ground up, mapped every change to my development logs, and ensured that all modifications were fully timestamped and recorded. By Friday night, I was still in the office, hoodie on, hair tied back, cold brew beside me, granola bars stacked on the desk. I had not worked through the night like that since graduate school, and I realized I missed it. I rewrote the backup protocols, layered encryption over the master keys, removed old mirrors that Marcus or anyone else could have attempted to reach, rebuilt version control, and linked every Apollo iteration directly to my original design records. If anyone tried to reverse engineer my work, they would hit dozens of barriers, each one traceable back to me. By Sunday afternoon, everything was complete. I called Diane and told her I needed to file 5 additional patents: adaptive response protocols, behavioral prediction modules, threat detection algorithms, and 2 interface frameworks. She asked about ownership. I told her all of it would remain under my name, fully time-stamped, notarized, and filed without room for interpretation. She did not question the request. She already understood. Monday morning, I walked in rested and focused. Marcus was waiting near the coffee station, arms crossed, jaw tight. He commented that I had been busy. I replied that he had no idea. He followed me down the hall and stepped in front of my office before I could badge in. He said none of this changed anything and claimed the company still owned the platform. I told him calmly that they owned the name, not the engine, not the logic, and certainly not the patents. He warned me I was playing a dangerous game. I unlocked the door, stepped inside, and faced him. I told him the only issue here was stopping federal IP theft and that the matter was already settled. He moved closer and asked if I really thought I could lock them out. I corrected him and made it clear that if he attempted another backdoor entry, I would bury him in legal process long before his father could intervene. He studied me, looking for hesitation. There was none. I told him I was not afraid and that I was not leaving. He said nothing, turned, and walked away. I closed the door, sat down, and drafted a company-wide security update. Everyone received new credentials. Every access route now ran through my authorization. By noon, every Apollo engineer was operating under updated authentication, and Marcus had no access at all. Shortly after, a calendar invite arrived. Urgent executive board meeting, 2 p.m., main conference room, full board, and legal counsel present. They were no longer pretending. When I entered, the room was full. 12 board members, 3 corporate attorneys, and Harrison Ellington standing at the front. Marcus sat at the far end watching me. I took my seat, opened my laptop, and waited. Harrison spoke about resolving concerns around Apollo and settling the IP dispute internally. A revised buyout agreement was slid across the table, offering retention bonuses, stock options, and a larger figure. I did not touch it. I stated clearly that no discussion would happen without my attorney present, and noted that the meeting itself was already inappropriate. The room shifted. Harrison dismissed the comparison to a courtroom. I asked why legal was present, and there was no response. I stood and connected my laptop to the projector. On screen were server logs showing Marcus's executive session ID alongside screen captures of Nathan Cross accessing my proprietary files, fully time-stamped, IP verified, and traced to a network Marcus had used repeatedly. The room went silent. I explained that this was not just an internal violation, but unauthorized access to my personal cloud storage, a federal offense under the Computer Fraud and Abuse Act. Every log, hash, and address was documented. An older board member asked if it was verified. I confirmed every entry and stated that all accessed material was protected by registered patents, with legal action already prepared. I laid out the options: license my frameworks under a fair contract with me retaining ownership, or lose the platform entirely when protected code was removed. Marcus tried to interrupt, and I cut him off, stating my authority was absolute. Harrison attempted to reason with me, citing investment costs. I responded that honoring the person who built the system would have been the smarter investment. I packed up my laptop, looked at Marcus, advised him to hire someone who could actually code, and left the room. The next morning, my badge no longer worked. I documented it immediately and left a voicemail noting that Marcus had revoked my access. I attempted the service entrance using my emergency facilities badge. It was disabled as well. By mid-morning, I was at my desk, logged in remotely, reviewing activity. Just as expected, someone had attempted to push an unauthorized update into Apollo's test environment overnight. The code was poorly written, an incomplete attempt to recreate my predictive algorithms. Marcus was scrambling. Messages began circulating, suggesting I was leaving and that Apollo was being reassigned. He was trying to undermine my authority by spreading uncertainty. I stayed focused. That afternoon, I booked the largest conference room and called a mandatory all-hands meeting for the Apollo team. I explained that everything we built was legally protected and that Apollo could not function without the patented framework. We broke into units: architecture, deployment, infrastructure, diagnostics, behavioral response, and front-end integration, and mapped every dependency tied to my intellectual property. 3 hours later, we had documentation solid enough for federal review. One copy went to Diane. Another was stored on a secure external server Marcus did not know existed. As I headed to the parking garage, I heard footsteps behind me. Marcus told me I had made my point. I said I had made it days earlier. He warned me about power structures beyond my level. I responded that someone who could not write a single line of code was not qualified to lecture me on power. He accused the company of eventually discarding me. I replied that doing so would cost them their flagship product and asked whether he could say the same. I explained that control comes from leverage, and I had all of it: the code, the team, the patents, and the legal record. I told him I did not need the company to survive. He had no answer. I got into my car and drove away, seeing him in the mirror, standing still, realizing he had lost control of something he never truly owned. The next morning, I arrived before anyone else. 3 weeks remained before Apollo's launch. Everything was on a timer. I started with the master encryption keys tied to adaptive learning, predictive modeling, and real-time threat response. I rewrote the encryption entirely, locked it behind timed release protocols, and synced the keys to my personal secure server. Any bypass attempt would permanently shut the system down. This was no longer just about protection. By midweek, unfamiliar contractors appeared, claiming infrastructure roles. I recognized two from a failed security startup Harrison had tried to acquire. One tried to talk shop with me in the elevator. I smiled and told him he was wasting his time. They were attempting to rebuild what I had already secured. Good luck with that. I spent the rest of the day watching server logs, tracking external IPs, and probing modules they did not understand, looking for logic paths that no longer existed. Everything I had built was already buried beneath layers of abstraction and deliberate misdirection. Without my involvement, Apollo was nothing more than a polished interface with no real engine behind it. That evening, I poured a glass of wine, sat at my kitchen counter, and opened an email from Catalyst Ventures. They were direct. They acknowledged that I controlled proprietary frameworks tied to Apollo and said that if Vanguard no longer aligned with my professional goals, they were interested in discussing an acquisition. They mentioned a number, hinted at equity, and made it clear they had already spoken with Diane. I did not accept, at least not yet, but I replied quickly enough to ensure the message circulated where it needed to. 2 days later, Harrison appeared on my floor without an assistant or advance notice. Gray suit, tense expression. He asked to talk. I stayed seated and agreed. He sat across from me, carefully choosing his words, mentioning rumors, outside interest, and competitor offers, and said he hoped they were not true. I told him they were accurate and that they represented leverage. He reminded me how critical Apollo was and how closely the board and investors were watching. I told him the reality. Apollo ran on my infrastructure, and if I walked away, the system would fail within 12 hours. Guaranteed. For a moment, his composure slipped. He suggested cooperation. I reminded him that I had already offered two choices: license my technology on fair terms or lose access entirely, and that the opportunity to decide was closing. The following morning, I ran a live demonstration for the board's internal auditors. A stripped-down version of Apollo ran smoothly on a test server. Midway through the demo, I revoked my authentication. The system froze completely. 6 seconds. No recovery. Just failure. The auditors said nothing, took notes, and left, clearly understanding what they would report. That night, I left my office door open, lights on, diagnostics running clean and stable on my screen. Marcus passed by twice without speaking. He understood, and I wanted him to. I did not wait for another confrontation. The next morning, I scheduled the meeting myself. Apollo Framework Dependency Review. Thursday, 9 a.m., board members and select investors included. I sent the invite using my senior systems administrator credentials and looped in everyone who mattered, including two major Silicon Valley investors. I wanted witnesses, and I made sure they were paying attention. At exactly 8:59, I connected my laptop and launched a live sandbox. I explained that Apollo was running in real time with behavioral prediction, adaptive threat response, and learning protocols, all built on frameworks registered under my patents. I disabled a single dependency. The screen glitched, then froze. Every process stopped. I explained that the platform could not function legally, technically, or operationally without those components. I then displayed a spreadsheet detailing dependencies, patent IDs, and licensing timelines, all linked to timestamps, filings, development logs, and federal IP records. Harrison said there was no need for theatrics. I replied that he had not understood the situation weeks earlier, but he did now. He said they were willing to negotiate. I agreed and stated that the cost had increased. Marcus accused me of extortion. I corrected him. I was setting terms. I listed their actions plainly: attempting to steal my work, revoking my building access, spreading false claims that I was leaving, and hiring contractors to replicate my systems. I explained that I had stayed quiet while keeping the company operational, and now I was offering a way forward. I showed the final figure: $550 million for exclusive, irrevocable, non-transferable licensing. Harrison called it absurd. I called it survival and added that the price would increase by $5 million per day, with a deadline of Monday. A remote investor asked if the dependency links had been verified. I confirmed every one and stated my legal team was prepared to proceed if needed. Then the oldest board member spoke. Marcus was removed immediately with no access or authority. He protested, but I cut him off. Harrison tried to suggest reassignment. I refused. Either Marcus was out or the deal ended. I watched the board calculate delays, investor fallout, and public consequences. The facts made the decision for them. The chair called the vote. The majority approved, with only Marcus dissenting. I packed my laptop and told them to send the paperwork by end of day, or the price would increase again. Then I left. By Friday afternoon, legal clearance was complete. The licensing contract was signed, executed, and funded. That evening, Apollo launched. I watched from the observation room as dashboards turned green one by one. Behavioral engines online. Predictive response stable. Every subsystem performing as designed. My team moved efficiently, exactly as rehearsed. I did not go on stage when my name was announced. I let the product speak. My lead engineer ran the live demo flawlessly, and when asked about the system's design, she credited me directly. The acknowledgement was clear and sufficient. Afterward, investors and board members approached, suddenly respectful, suddenly attentive. Harrison stood quietly in the background. Marcus was absent, formally removed from anything connected to Apollo. The system was now permanently protected. We celebrated briefly with cheap champagne in the break room. I left a note for the team and stepped outside into the night. 2 new offers waited on my phone, both serious, both focused on vision and ownership. I paused in the parking lot, thinking about how far I had come since that first morning, walking into the building with a latte and a badge. Apollo had launched. It was solid and reliable, and so was I. The Monday after the launch, I walked into Harrison's office with a folder in one hand and my resignation letter in the other. He looked up from his desk, already pale, as if he knew exactly what was coming. I told him I was done and placed both documents on the table. 2 weeks' notice, effective immediately. He blinked and asked if I was serious. I told him I had never been more serious. He glanced at the folder and pointed out that I had just closed one of the largest licensing deals in the company's history and asked if I really wanted to leave now. I said I wasn't walking away. I was leaving on my own terms, and I already had. He didn't argue. He understood he couldn't. I submitted my notice formally, cleared my private files, left every system running clean, and transferred all institutional knowledge to Kira through long coffee meetings and strategy sessions. She was fully prepared. By my final day, I had finalized my company name, retained an IP attorney, and drafted funding terms. I called it Miles Intelligent Systems, fully independent, with no ties to anyone else's legacy. I filed incorporation paperwork in Seattle and set up headquarters in a converted warehouse near Pike Place Market. 2 days after announcing the launch, 4 of my strongest engineers emailed me the same question. Where do I sign? They showed up with laptops and ideas before we even had desks. 3 more joined the following week, including Nathan Cross. He had left Vanguard shortly after Marcus was removed. He told me he wasn't proud of how things started, but that he had learned more from my systems than he had in years of school and wanted to do things the right way. I gave him another chance, and he earned it. By the end of the first month, we secured seed funding, just under $12 million, from 2 venture groups that had followed my licensing case closely. Catalyst Ventures offered to license our early prototype for 3 times what they were paying Vanguard. Another firm offered to buy us outright. I declined both. Vanguard stock dropped 9% when news of my departure went public, then another 4% when Miles Intelligence launched its website. Kira sent me a screenshot from Vanguard's internal chat where someone had written, "What's Apollo without Miles?" I didn't reply. I didn't need to. We moved fast. No legacy systems, no internal politics, just focus and capability. Every engineer I hired was someone I trusted. No inflated titles, no egos, only results. The office was simple. Mismatched furniture and a coffee machine that barely worked. But the code was stronger, faster, and smarter than anything I had built before. I wasn't recreating the past. I was building something better. One night, while sketching data models on a whiteboard as the team ordered late-night food, it hit me that I wasn't trying to prove anyone wrong anymore. I was doing exactly what I wanted, without compromise or permission. Being underestimated had given me leverage. Now I had momentum. I stood by my office window with coffee in hand, watching the sun rise over Seattle. The view wasn't as high as before, but it mattered more because it was mine. 6 months in, Miles Intelligence reached a $1.2 billion valuation. 3 of Vanguard's largest clients moved to us. Our technology didn't just match Apollo, it outperformed it, and every line was protected under patents with my name on them. I hadn't chased success. It came to me. I thought briefly about Marcus, not out of bitterness, but because I remembered the moment he underestimated me. That was his mistake. They tried to break me down. Instead, they funded my independence. The real win wasn't the money or the outcome. It was knowing I never needed them at all.